Our institutional factor survey finds growing ESG popularity more than double in 2020. This is interesting because we looked at the ESG funds and, of course, found that ESG is not environmentally friendly? Of course not. It's Amazon, it's Facebook, it's Google, it's Apple, it's all of those companies. Okay, it's just a bunch of tech stocks, all of the biggest stocks in the world put into a fund, calling them environmentally friendly. And oh yes, you're going to be such a good person by investing in the green economy. And meanwhile, it's absolutely nothing of the sort. US home prices post record gain, topping peak from 2005. But don't worry, because when they measure the inflation, this will not have an impact. Of course, if you look at the inflation of 1.5%, that's the Fed's metric, does it include the fact that, as you see here, the Northeast led the way with a 21% gain as buyers rushed to the suburbs? You see that ridiculous pace in which prices of homes had increased, not just in the US, but in other places around the world, a spectacular rise that somehow doesn't translate to higher inflation. Just a quick note here, share of 18 to 34-year-old individuals living with their parents, and like I've said always, there's nothing wrong with this at all. If people live with their parents, if they co-inhabit with other people, they have roommates and so on, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But when we have people who don't want to be living in one of those co-living spaces, the dormitories essentially for adults that I've shown you many times before on this channel, simply because they can't afford any other arrangement, well, then you've got an issue. There's no reason why the average person, can't afford the average house. That's when you know something's out of whack. People justify it all the time. Well, you got to get in the market now. It's going to go up. That's not how it should be looked at. The average person working the average job should be able to afford the average home, the average car. Look, if they want to get something else, if they want a Rolls Royce, no, different story. But if they want the average things, the average job should be paying for it, right? But it's not. That's when you know you got major problems, and they are completely and entirely to blame. The central banks are completely and entirely to blame, and we should look no further. China topples US as EU's top trade partner over 2020. I thought this was interesting also because of how much China had promised to pay, and we know about that. I don't even want to call it trade deal, whatever it was, back of a napkin or something. The promises were there, and yet they didn't meet any of those promises. One, though, that accelerated considerably, I'll show you in just a second, still didn't make it to where they promised. But I thought this was interesting because even with all of that, the EU was still their top trade partner. There are a lot of stats right here. I'm not going to be able to read them all to you, but just know that China was EU's main trade partner in 2020, taking the top spot occupied until last year by the United States. In 2020, exports of EU goods to China increased by 2.2% and imports went up 5.6%, while EU trade with the rest of the world dramatically dropped, down 9.4% in terms of exports, down 11.6% in terms of imports compared with 2019. Interesting to see where this has gone. Again, if you want to check them out, definitely do read this one. I'll leave it in the description as always. China's soybean imports from the United States in 2020 rose by 52.8% from a year earlier. That's a huge step up, there's no doubt about it, but it fell short of what was needed for their commitments. We knew it, you and I both knew that they could never get up to that level. I mean, that was crazy, but this is what they told us. Now, that was one of the biggest ones, I believe. I don't have a full breakdown for all of 2020 yet, but I'll try to get that for you. This is just showing you what's been happening. They also mention here, soybean purchases were expected to make up half of the monetary target, and estimates showed China needed to import about 40 million tons to make good on the deal. Looks like they didn't get there quite at all. I mean, the world's top soybean buyer last year brought in 25 million tons of the oil seed from the US, and that was up from 16.94 million tons in 2019. Okay, a lot of numbers, but anyway, just the fact that they weren't even close. This was supposed to be the top one. I know that a lot of the farmers were only growing these crops with the belief that they were going to be shipped off to China. So I'm interested to see what's going on here in this case, specifically with soybeans as it relates to the US farmers. They got at least 2 bailouts, but I think there was a third. I'm not sure if that ever did go through. They didn't make a big deal about it in the media, that's for sure. But this is something that needs to be continuously covered because of what's been happening in between these two countries. Really quickly, wanted to point this out. I have a lot of people who have asked me talk about Bitcoin, talk about crypto, and so on. I'll just note a couple things. Anyway, what they say right here is, quote, the key for Bitcoin's path higher is to win over more corporate endorsements. And that certainly has been happening as of late. One of those things is this: North America's first Bitcoin ETF gets green light in Canada. So right now, Purpose Investments apparently says that it gained approval to launch a fund. So we will see if this does start a new wave of investment in it. I don't know what's going to happen necessarily, but this is where we're at today. If you weren't aware of that, this is definitely big news because this has been a huge, huge hurdle to get over recently, and this could be the start of much more.